Welcome to By Seat and By Saddle, Seeing North America by Car and by Motorcycle. In 2011, my wife Sue and I had just retired, so with our newfound freedom and a thirst for adventure, we decided to leave home and embark on a series of retirement trips. We had a great little Suzuki motorcycle that we rode around home, and if we wanted to explore roads far from home, we carried it on a tiny Canadian snow bear trailer. In preparation for further distance traveling, I replaced the pillion cushion on the rear fender of the motorcycle with a garden tractor seat so that Sue would be completely comfortable over the many hours we spent on the bike. I also fastened some plywood walls and a roof to the trailer and installed a wash basin and a portable toilet to make us completely independent. We towed the trailer and motorcycle with a small 1.8-liter Pontiac Vibe. We folded down the rear seat in the Vibe, a great feature in that car, and added a foam mattress. With a small fan, a hanging light, and our laptop, we were as cozy and comfortable as sleeping in a mini motel. Later, we upgraded to an 803cc Suzuki and eventually to a 2.5-liter Toyota RAV4 car, but this will all be evident from the pictures and descriptions that follow. This is the story of one of our trips, a trip we took to South Dakota, Wyoming, and Montana in September and October of 2011. We left Ontario in September and drove south through Michigan and into Indiana. Then we turned west and crossed Illinois and Iowa to South Dakota, which had some amazing sights and special events. Then, continuing west, we explored Wyoming and its unique attractions such as Yellowstone National Park. A little side trip along the Beartooth Mountains gave us an introduction to Montana. Returning to Wyoming, it had become time to return home, and we decided on a more southerly route which crossed Nebraska. We had again taken pictures of some of the most interesting places and events on our continent. The story of this trip is divided into 4 parts. This list shows what we did and things we saw during each of the 4 parts. You can pick the parts that interest you or more easily find anything you'd like to see again. The part which follows is the first part. Note that you can stop the video at any time for a closer look at any photograph. So come on and travel with us again. We'll take you along with words and photographs. It's a pleasure to share them with you. On September 20th, we entered the U.S. at Port Huron and drove across the Michigan Peninsula into Illinois. Skirting Chicago, we followed the I-80 through Illinois and crossed the mighty Mississippi River into Iowa at Bettendorf. This magnificent river has a long and rich history, and its water flows all the way down to New Orleans, just about 1,000 miles. It seemed important to just dip our hands into water that has such a long journey ahead of it. Leaving the Mississippi River behind, we headed west following the setting sun. It was late that first night when we stopped near Solon, Iowa to camp at Lake McBride State Park. It is the largest state park in Iowa. Lake McBride is on the Iowa River, which is a tributary of the Mississippi. Detouring a bit north, we caught Highway 20 and then continued west across Iowa, eventually reaching South Dakota at Sioux City. We spent the night in a lovely campground in the Lewis and Clark State Recreation Area. It is right beside the Missouri River at Yankton and has a Lewis and Clark Visitor Center. Lewis and Clark were leaders of an 1804 expedition up the Missouri River to explore the land that President Jefferson had bought from Napoleon in the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. Missouri River is prone to flooding here, and a record-breaking flood just that spring had devastated much of the region. One of the dams used to control such flooding is the Gavins Point Dam and Power Plant near the Lewis and Clark Recreation Area. The flow past this dam during the flood was 2.3 times higher than the previous record set back in 1997. On June 1, 2011, the flood had forced the evacuation of about 3,000 people in nearby Fort Peary and Peary, our next destinations. To get to Fort Peary, we detoured north to Interstate I-90 and then north again on Highway 83. For us, Fort Peary was especially interesting because in 1743, French-Canadian brothers Louis, Joseph, and François de la Verendrye had buried a lead plate here and claimed the territory for King Louis XV of France. The plate was buried on the crest of a small hill overlooking the Missouri River. It is now on display at the South Dakota Cultural Heritage Center, just across the river in Peary. It is considered one of the most significant historical finds in the northwestern United States. We just had to see the plates, so we crossed the river to Peary and drove over to the South Dakota Cultural Heritage Center. The female statue in front of the center is the Citadel statue and is dedicated to the pioneer women of South Dakota. A couple of interesting exhibits inside the museum were a stagecoach and a pioneering sod house. Now for the actual La Verendrye plate. It is 8.5 inches long by 6.5 inches wide and was discovered by 3 local South Dakota teenagers in 1913. The event was described in Canadian school readers of the 1950s and is still a vivid memory. The front is Latin and reads, "In the 26th year of the reign of Louis XV, the most illustrious lord, the Lord Marquis of Beauharnois being Viceroy, 1741, Pierre Gaultier de la Verendrye placed this." The back is in French script and reads, "Placed by the Chevalier de la Verendrye, Louis-Joseph, Louis Lalondet à Mayotte, 30th of March, 1743. About halfway between Peary and Rapid City, just off the I-90 and near the entrance to the Badlands, there's a Minuteman II intercontinental ballistic missile site. This one was called the Delta 9 launch facility. It was one of 10 in the Rapid City area and one of 50 in South Dakota. During the Cold War, there were 1,000 of these sites scattered across the continental USA. The flight of these missiles from South Dakota to central Moscow would take them north over Canada, across the Arctic Ocean, and then down over Sweden and Finland. This sign is an adapted picture of a Domino's pizza box. The familiar 3-dot logo represents the company's first 3 stores in 1965. During the latter half of the Cold War, Domino's advertised delivery policy was delivery within 30 minutes or the next pizza was free. The distance to the Kremlin was 5,170 miles, and the Minuteman II flight time was about 30 minutes. Gallows humor at its best. The site has a control center 30 feet underground with 2 control consoles. Simultaneously turning 2 keys, one on each console, would have ignited a nuclear holocaust. For safety reasons, the keys were positioned far enough apart to require 2 persons to turn them at the same time. The control center was equipped with giant shock absorbers for protection against the shock of a nuclear bomb strike. The orange hatch shown is at the bottom of a 30-foot duct filled with sand. The hatch and duct were an emergency escape route if the elevators became inoperable. Multi-ton blast stores also provided bomb protection. The silo adjacent to the control center contained a Minuteman II training missile aimed at a specific Russian target. The actual targets are still classified information. The reflections from the glass over the silo cover prevented a good photograph of the missile now in the silo, but the resulting ghost-like image in the picture was somehow appropriate. Each missile had the explosive power of 60% of all the bombs dropped during World War II. A clear mental image of such destructive power is virtually impossible and probably also best described as ghost-like. A 110-ton cover over the silo is called the Launcher Closure Door, or LCD. It was mounted on rails and would be propelled out of the way when the missile was about to be launched. The next stop was Keystone in the Black Hills of South Dakota. We unloaded the motorcycle and got ready to start exploring. Our little 250cc Suzuki was perfect for riding the Black Hills, and it never let us down. The Black Hills are stunningly beautiful. Iron Mountain Road is a spectacular 17-mile-long section of Highway 16A that has 314 curves, 14 switchbacks, 3 pigtails, and 3 tunnels. In a pigtail, the road passes under itself. Iron Mountain Road winds through the Black Hills National Forest, Custer State Park, and passes by Mount Rushmore. Highway 87 is another scenic road that connects to Highway 16A and also winds through the Black Hills. An incredibly scenic 14-mile stretch of Highway 87 is called Needles Highway because of its needle rocks, that is, tall rocks pointed at the top. Sylvan Lake is along the Needles Highway and was featured in the 2007 Disney movie National Treasure Book of Secrets, starring Nicolas Cage. When we rode by, chairs were being set up beside it for a wedding. That night, we rode into Rockerville for supper at the Gaslight Dining Saloon. In the dark, its neon lights were a warm and welcoming sight for us on our little motorcycle. The warm and friendly atmosphere inside with nostalgic Western and travel decor made a perfect ending to a great day. The next day, we continued exploring the Black Hills, roads that twisted and turned carried us past stunning scenery. Hills, rocks, and formidable stone barriers were defeated by a wide variety of tunnels. A wide range of entertainment choices included something for everyone. We followed one road down to Custer State Park. There was a festival going on in the park with amazing stuff for sale. There was also other neat stuff to buy elsewhere along the way. Another day, we rode to what must be the largest sculpture on the continent, Mount Rushmore. It was awe-inspiring to look at and fascinating to learn how it was sculpted. Who would ever have thought that a mountain could be turned into a sculpture? The U.S. President's faces from left to right are George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln. We learned many fascinating details about how Danish sculptor Gutzon Borglum created his masterpiece. For example, he added 2-foot specks of white granite to the president's eyes to make them appear alive. We also saw the 1/12 scale model from which all the measurements were taken and applied to the mountain. The measurements were made using a plate on the top of each head marked in degrees, and a horizontal pole on each plate with a plumb line that could be moved along the pole. The pole was set at a given angle and the plumb line dropped until it touched the face of the model. The 3 numbers, which are the angle of the pole, the radial distance along the pole to the plumb line, and the length of the plumb line to the face, were then multiplied by 12 and applied at full scale to the mountain using identical but bigger plates and poles. The project ran out of money in 1949 and is still incomplete. Note, for example, that Lincoln's ear on the model is still missing on the mountain sculpture. The likeness of the sculpted presidents' faces to their actual appearance is remarkable and required specialized and detailed techniques. For example, plaster casts were also used to ensure the sculpted faces were a true representation of the subject's faces. The sculpting process also involved the coordination of many workers who hung on cables and blasted and chiseled the facial features directly out of the mountain rock. An Ingersoll Rand air compressor, Imperial Type 10, supplied the compressed air to the pneumatic chisels. This is the end of Part 1. In Part 2, we visit a paleontological site containing scores of prehistoric mammoth bones. We also attend the annual buffalo roundup in Custer State Park. Then we make our way out of South Dakota and through the Bighorn Mountains of Wyoming to visit Yellowstone National Park.